Today we'll also talk about something related to research part, all right? So now maybe this will help you also if you are going for a research, if you're planning to pursue some research, or it will help you for the technical documentation as well. So we'll try to understand all that in this particular presentation. All right, so we were talking about that. We'll have a little look on the research part. That how do we go ahead and what is the objective of the entire thing? So let's understand that. So it says that the form your research design takes, what your research should be will depend upon these factors. Number one, it depends upon the type of knowledge you aim to produce. That means what kind of data or what kind of knowledge you want to give to your end user. So your research will depend upon that, right? Then the second thing that will depend upon is the type of data you will collect and analyze. So based upon the objective, you will have to decide that out of all the matter that we have on the internet, right? So there's a lot of data that is there. So out of which one would be the exact mapping or the exact replica of what we actually need, right? And the third one would be the sampling methods, the time scale, and location of the research. So these are certain factors that we need to keep in our mind while we are going for a research. All right. Now, based upon different factors, there can be different types of research. For example, we can have a basic research. Okay, basic research means that we are just giving, the kind of knowledge or maybe whatever information that we have found, we are just providing that. So that's a basic research that we'll do. Or we can do an applied research also. Now, applied means something which will have some experiments in it, right? Some techniques, some algorithms, so something that we need to prove there. And whatever methods that you are recommending, there has to be a logic or a supported algorithm or a flowchart discussed in that. So that is something which is applied research. So it says, do you want to expand your scientific understanding or solve a practical problem? So if it is a theoretical thing, we can keep it as a basic research. But if we want to go into the practical aspect of it, then we will have to go for the applied research. Now then there is another category which says exploratory and explanatory. Okay. Now as the term says, exploratory means you are trying to explore something. So something which was under research or maybe it was a work in progress. So you are trying to put your brains in that. You are trying to do a little more investigation in that, and then based upon it, you are trying to find out the data. So that is exploratory. And explanatory would mean that you are just explaining the causes or the basic consequences that will be there. So you are just trying to explain, you are just giving the knowledge. So that would be explanatory. So it says in this case, how much is already known about your research problem. So you will have to check that how much it is that people already know about that. So you will have to give it in the background history. Remember, we talked about that in the paper. We'll be writing the introduction part, wherein we will talk about what all things have been already done. So that is given in introduction or maybe in the background, right? So that would be this part. Then we can say, are you conducting any initial research or a newly identified issue? That means something new that you have found out. Is it that you are trying to explore something new also, or you are just informing the end users about the already existing things? So that will depend, and based upon that, you can decide whether it is exploratory or explanatory. Is that clear, people, so far? Are we clear? So I just told that about the aim of the research. That means the kind of research that we are doing that will be based upon the knowledge that you want the end users to have. Okay. So what type of knowledge do you want your end users to have? So based upon that, your entire paper or entire research will be. Second thing could be the kind of information that you will gather. So the points like when you are doing the research, you are trying to collect the data, right? Now that will depend upon the kind of knowledge that I'm trying to give to my customers, my end users, right? So that
Okay.
will also depend. And the third part is your sampling methods or maybe the experiments that you will be doing. So these are the 3 pointers that will be considered while we are doing the research. And then based upon all these factors, we have different types of research. I hope the screen is visible to everyone, huh? Types of research. So the first type is basic versus applied, wherein we say that, when we are just trying to inform, there we can have a basic research. While if we are trying to experiment something, then we call it as an applied research. Okay. Second one is exploratory or explanatory. Explanatory again is, for example, you are writing a case study. So there you are, maybe you are just,
Explain.
right? You are explaining them.
Yes.
Exploratory means that there are
Investigate the
things,
people.
yeah, you are trying to explore new things in that. So maybe there is some already done research, but then you have some new approach to it. So in that case, it will become an exploratory research, wherein you are trying to put some practical aspect to it. Maybe you have a flowchart or an algorithm of your own theory, so that can be put in this. Okay, I hope the first two are clear. Yeah, inductive versus deductive. Now, this is, as the name suggests, inductive means you are trying to develop a theory, whereas deductive means that based upon the observation, you are testing a theory. Okay, so when you are just trying to develop a theory, then it becomes inductive, and you try to test it by some observation, then it becomes a deductive. So, what are the questions that you can ask here? Is there already some theory on your research problem that you can use? So, are there any already existing conditions that I can use for my research uh, to develop the hypothesis? Now, hypothesis means, remember in the mathematical equations, we used to form some hypothesis statements. So that means we used to make some assumptions, right? We assume this, that x is equal to y, and then we try to do the entire equation, right? So that is how you do it in research also. So you have some hypothesis available here, and based upon that, you try to form it. Then it says, do you want to propose a new theory? So based upon the findings that you have, basically this we already do it in our research papers. So if there is some finding that I found, and based upon it, I want to inform my customer. Okay, now it says primary versus secondary. So how do I remember? We have already talked about it. Primary means the kind of interviews that you take of the SMEs. Remember? Yes, people? Do we remember primary research? Right. So
Yeah.
based upon the actual interaction with the SMEs or with the coders or with the experts, with the technicians, so all that is primary research. Whereas secondary research means the kind of papers that you refer to, the kind of maybe a book that you are referring to. So all that is secondary research. Okay. Now qualitative and quantitative, again, as the name says, qualitative means you are writing it in terms of theory. So maybe in terms of words, we are trying to explain it. Whereas in quantitative, it will be more of maybe it will be a statistical analysis based on numbers, right? So that's why we'll call it as quantitative. So is your research more concerned with measuring something or interpreting something, then it will be quantitative, right? Again, descriptive and experimental. Descriptive is without any variables. So I am just describing a process. Whereas in experimental, again, I have some variables, some hypothesis, and based upon it, I'm trying. These are certain more kind of given here, probability versus non-probability. So we'll not go into this because it's more to a person who is going for research. Cross-sectional, longitudinal field. So not go into this one. So this is all about the aim of the research that we talk about. Now, after we know what the aim is, we need to explore the research paper. That means we need to understand the um, know-hows behind the research paper, right? So, do you think that we research everywhere? I mean, research is involved in everyday life. Do you feel that, people? It is, right? So whenever we hear something, suppose nowadays this is Omicron, right? The new variant of COVID that is in the news. So as soon as you hear a new term, what do? You actually go into your Google or your news flash or your Times, Times Now app that you have, or your TV, of course, and then you try to do the research. Now that is also a research because you are trying to find out what is the news behind this term, what are the cases happening. So all that is also an everyday research that we are doing, right? Now, when we talk about a research, these are the things that we take care of. One, it strengthens the arguments. So these are basically the advantages of research. So do you think if you have done a proper research, you can have a more confident argument if somebody is asking something about the facts? So do you think we can have a more confident and strengthened arguments? Yes. Yeah. Why? Because I have already found a lot of things. So if somebody will come to me and say, no, no, there is nothing called as Omicron. I will actually, I can go ahead and show them that, see, this is the news that is coming from here or from there. So if we have facts, we can always have a healthy discussion with somebody. Then it says add depth to discussion. Of course, it does. When you have a lot of information with you, you can actually go ahead and explain things to people. Can eliminate personal bias. How will that be? How will that happen? How does a research eliminate your partiality or personal bias that you have? How does it do? So, based upon the research that you are doing, now that you know that there are certain cases of, for example, this Omicron, there are certain cases and they have actually given the analysis, the test reports. So now you can actually, eradicate that personal point of view that you have. Remember when there was this AIDS awareness that used to happen? So there were so many myths about it, that people would get it, by touching or by, it is a contaminating thing and all that. Then what happened? The news and the media started making people aware that this is actually not a contaminating thing. It is only through the blood transfer that it happens, right? Remember those days when we used to have this HIV awareness, a lot of programs that used to happen. Now this is the place wherein you can eliminate your personal bias. Now that you have the proper knowledge of that disease, or the results that it has, or the causes and the effects. Now you can actually give an unbiased decision on that, and that is very much required by a technical writer. So that is why research is very important, and it also gives credibility. It creates a trust factor, because I have facts with me, so I can always have that trust factor, right? So these are the advantages of research. Now let's see. This is a small paragraph here. If you read this, it is asking that we will be reading two paragraphs, and out of those, you need to tell which one is more credible, interesting, and objective. Okay, so there are three things that you have to check: the credibility, the interest that it can create for the audience, and the overall objective. Okay, so just take 2-3 minutes, try to read this paragraph. Maybe you can do it in your mind, and then I will open the second version of the same thing. Yeah, okay, so let me open the second version. All right, now this is the second version of the same write-up. Just have a look of this also, and then we will decide among these, between these two paragraphs, which one is more credible. Which one do you find more credible? Credible means based upon factors that it can be trusted, and then interest for the audience, and also for the objective. Now, why do you think? Give me one reason, people. Why do you think that the second one is a better version? Even if you see that it's a very long paragraph. So, people, we can make it a better version. However, how can I do that? I mean, all the things are here. It's only that they are not properly, maybe not in the form of a technical write-up. So how do you think we can do that? Either, we can have some subheadings. So like first we can have an introduction, and then we can have probably the causes. So all this long paragraph, it will look nice if, if I put it particular headings based upon the objective, right? So
Yes.
that's how it will be more presentable. However, it is undoubtedly it is more credible. I mean, as compared to the last one, because if you see this one, the first one, it is more like, the writer is giving his or her point of view. You can see now it says, "I know I can't miss my favorite program." So it's like it is actually not following the rule of unbiased thing, right? So I have to follow that. I can't give my own point of view when I'm talking. So here the objective is to tell about the importance of sleep. So I cannot write it in an essay form. So that would be more of a creative writing than a technical writing. And of course, if you will give all the facts and all, it will also create interest. So I hope all these points are clear. Now, we already talked about, now these are the examples. In primary research, it is more of a survey or an interview, whereas in secondary, it is books, articles, reports that you keep. Now, these are the purposes of the research paper. So, first of all, you describe a problem, right? You pursue your audience as well. So, for example, when you're writing a white paper, you actually it's a persuasive writing wherein you are trying to convince your customers that, see, these are the technologies available, and if you go for this, it will be, your life would be easier. So that's how it makes the persuasiveness, the factor of persuasiveness is there. Then you inform the customer, undoubtedly, because it's a technical document and the major objective is to inform. And we give the reasons, the causes, the problem, and the solution, and the benefits that we will get out of it, right? So we are providing the cause and effect. So this is the purpose of my research paper. So in all, I can say that research is a very important tool, and I have to take care of what kind of research I have to do based upon the kind of objective that I have. So it's very important. Okay, now let's see one more aspect. Here it talks about main types of research. I hope this is visible. The types of research. Yeah, okay. Now, see, there are three things that we are talking about. The type of knowledge you aim to produce, the type of data. Remember these 3 points we talked about, right? So, how do I do that? So, when you talk about the type of knowledge you aim to produce, I am actually trying to say that this is either basic, applied, exploratory or explanatory, inductive or deductive. Now, in this one, they will actually give you some examples here. So, when I talk about inductive research, based upon some observation, I'm trying to develop a theory. So, just have a look on the example here. It's a very interesting example. It says a low cost airline flight is delayed. So, this is an observation that a writer has done. Second observation is dogs A and B have fleas. Okay, this is the second observation. And the third one is that elephants depend on water to exist. So these were the three observations done. Now, based upon this observation, there is a pattern that has been made. So what is the pattern based upon the first observation? That another 20 flights from low cost airlines are delayed. So this is the pattern that has been formed. Now, how do you find a pattern? You actually study that. So you saw that there were 20 flights who had a low cost airline and they were delayed. So only the low cost airlines are being delayed. That's what you are trying to find out here. And then second observation, the pattern that you found was that all the observed dogs, so whatever data you had, all the observed dogs had this flea thing. Okay. And the third observation, based upon the observation, the pattern that I found was that all observed animals depend on water to exist. So there I was just observing elephants, and now I have given it that all observed animals depend on water. Now, based upon this pattern, I actually developed the theory. So, what theory did I develop? The first statement that I found was low cost airlines always have delays. So I have just given a general statement based upon whatever pattern maybe I just took a pattern from my own apartment, maybe, huh? So from that, I just found out that all dogs have fleas. And the third one is that all biological life depends on water to exist. So these are the three statements that I have given. And what was the reason to give this theory? The observation that I made. Okay, so is this inductive research clear to people? Yes.
Yes.
How did we do that? Okay, now let's come to the next one, the deductive. Now, this is a kind of a reverse process. Okay, a kind of a reverse process from inductive one. So, what does it do? It starts with an existing theory. So, it starts with the theory that is already there. So, the theory was that low cost airlines always have delays, all the three statements, the theory that was made. So, it started from there. Based upon it, it made a hypothesis. So there was a conditional statement also attached to it. You cannot just give a general statement. You should have some condition attached to it. So first condition is that if passengers fly with a low cost airline, then they will always experience delays. So this is the hypothesis formed. Then it says all pet dogs in my apartment. Now we are talking about only our apartment. And then the third one I'm saying all the land mammals depend on exit. So these are the hypothesis statements that I have given in order to prove that theory that is there. Okay. Now I'm trying to collect the data based upon this hypothesis. So what did I do? In the first one, I actually collected the flight data for low cost airlines. Second one, I actually tested all the dogs in my building, in my apartment. And third one was I studied the mammal species, maybe one particular mammal species I did it. And then I found out that they depend on water. They cannot live without water, right? Now we need to analyze the result. So, how do you analyze the result? You will have to find out that whether the theory that you have given is rejected or supported by the hypothesis that you give, right? So, you have to see that whether there is an exception to it or it will be done for all the cases. So like in the first one, it says 5 out of 100 flights of low cost airlines are not delayed. So based upon the data collection, they found out that not all the flights, but there were 5 flights which were not delayed, even if they were low cost. So that means there is a exception. There is an exception here. Now in the second one, 10 out of 20 dogs did not have fleas. So again, when I went ahead and did the observation, I found that it was not that all pet dogs had fleas. Out of that, 10 out of 20. So that ratio was maintained. So again, the hypothesis is rejected. But in the third one, it is supported. So it says that actually, when we did these testing, we found that all land and mammal species depend on water. So that means that sometimes your theory will support the hypothesis, sometimes it will not. But as a technical writer, your aim should be to mention all the hypothesis statements, also to mention everything which is there. You cannot just say that, okay, you cannot just pass on a general statement. You should give all the possibilities that are supported by it based upon the observation that has been done. Is this clear, people? Yes. Okay. Now, research data, we have already discussed about it, that how it goes. So if we talk about the primary resource, they are more of letters, diaries, photographs, or we can say the novels. If we are talking about the communication, then it could be interviews, recordings, newspapers. It could be a legal text as well, right? Or it could be a study or a statistical data. So that these are all primary resources. Talking about the secondary one, like the books, the articles, the documentaries, synopses, descriptions, encyclopedias, essays, all these are secondary sources. So, primary source, if let's say if the primary source is the novel, then secondary source could be an article analyzing the novel, right? And for example, if it is a letter and a diary, so the secondary source could be a biography of that. So, meaning to say that, when you go into the detailed form of that which is already there, then it becomes a secondary source. And if it is a direct thing, then it is primary. Now, a secondary source can become a primary. So how can we actually change a secondary source to a primary, depending upon the research question? So if the person, context, or technique that produces the source is the main focus of your research, so it becomes a primary source. So even if a secondary source is actually connected directly to research, then it can probably end up being the primary source. So for example, when we talk about documentaries. So if you are researching the cause of World War II, for example, they have just given an example that you are trying to find out the causes of World War II. So what did you do? A recent documentary about the war. So there was this documentary played, and you referred to that documentary, and that is why it becomes a secondary source. But if you are researching the filmmaking techniques used in historical documentation, so now if you are, the same documentary, but then you are trying to find out the filmmaking techniques. So now for that, this documentary becomes the primary. So meaning to say that based upon the objective, the same source can be a primary source as well, or it could be a secondary source. So a documentary movie could be a primary source if we are talking about the filmmaking techniques. But if we are talking about something which is an indirect observation of a film, then it could be a secondary. Again, for the reviews and essays also, if your paper is about the novels written by Toni Morrison, is a writer, a magazine review of one of her novels is a secondary source. So review could be a secondary source. But if your paper is about the critical reception, that means if we are actually trying to find out the criticality in the writer's work, then this same review can become the primary source as well. Now talking about the newspaper articles, if if your aim is to analyze the government's economic policy, let's say that we are trying to find out the government's economic policies, a newspaper article could be a secondary source because we are trying to find out the government's economic policy. But if your aim is to analyze the media coverage, so because now the objective is about the media coverage, so that's why it will become a primary source. So based upon the questions, my data could be either primary or. Now it says how to tell if a source is primary or secondary. Now, how do you decide whether it is primary or secondary? So let's see the kinds of questions that you have. So if it is coming directly and it is involving a direct thing for the events, it will be primary. And if it is from the other researcher, then it would be secondary. Am I interested in analyzing the source itself? So if I'm analyzing the source itself, it will be a primary. And if it is, I'm just using it as a background information. So let's say we were talking about pandemic and you had a paper with you found out, wherein they were given all details about the pandemic that have happened earlier. So here you are trying to just give the background information. So then it could be a secondary research. But if I am trying to analyze the same topic, same thing, then it could be a primary. Again, if it is an original information, it is primary. If it is a comment from some other source, it could become a secondary. Now, how do what do you use primary sources for? So, where do we use the primary source for making new discoveries? Of course, when you are making new discoveries, making new observations, then you will use primary source. Primary source would be a more credible evidence because it is a direct involvement, right? It will give authoritative information also. Why? Because you have a direct interview or a recording that you have. Now, where do we use a secondary source? Wherein we want to give a background information there, or you want to support or contrast your arguments. So you just want some supporting arguments. So you can say that, okay, there were these two writers who also talked about the same thing. So that is again a reference that you are taking. So again, secondary source. And gather information from primary source that you can't access directly. So maybe you cannot directly go ahead and have an interview with the government official. So what will you do? You will actually refer to the material which is available in the library or on the social media. So there you can call it as. Now, qualitative, quantitative, we have already discussed. Qualitative would be more of your words, the process, whereas quantitative would be more of numbers. So quantitative will always prove to test theories, hypotheses, whereas qualitative is for exploring ideas. So when you are trying to explore some idea, you are not giving any mathematical aspect to it, then it could be a qualitative. If it is analyzed through math and statistical analysis, again, it becomes a quantitative. And if it has a summary, a categorization, an interpretation, then it will be a qualitative. Mainly in quantitative, you will have more of tables, right? Tables, maybe the graphs, right? Or the pie charts and all that you have, the equations that you have, all that is the part of quantitative research. Whereas most of the qualitative research is in the form of words. You require many respondents. That means you require a full-fledged observation when you are done, when you are doing a quantitative one, because obviously when you have to make a chart, you have to make a table, so you need a lot of observation, a lot of data. Whereas in qualitative, that's not required. Closed-ended questions would be the part of your quantitative. Of course, when we are just dealing with numbers and equations, it could be more of objective, whereas the open-ended questions could be the part of your qualitative research. The keywords that will be there in quantitative would be words like testing, measurement, objectivity, right? All these other terms related to quantitative research. And if it is a qualitative one, then the complexity, the subjectivity, the understanding, and the overall context. Okay, these are the examples: content analysis, observation, experiments, and surveys. This is how you collect the data in the quantitative form. And qualitative would be more of interviews, focus groups, case studies, literature review. Remember, Navriti, that day we were talking about the difference between a report and a case study. Yeah, so see, here it answers your question. So, case study is the more of a data collection, okay, and report becomes a more of informative thing wherein you are giving your own. I mean, you are giving the exact the kind of problems and the causes and the effects that were there and of each department. So that becomes a more investigative form, wherein case study becomes a lot of qualitative data collection. Okay. Use when you want to confirm or test something, you will use a quantitative one. Where you just want to understand something, you will go for quantitative. Sorry, qualitative, right? Analyzing the quantitative, how do I analyze the quantitative data? By application. So there are so many applications available through which you can analyze, like Excel. You have Excel, SPSS. So these are some of the tools that are used if you are going ahead and doing some quantitative data research. And if it is the qualitative one, then of course we can have the position, the meanings, right? The, the causes, the effects, all that will come under qualitative thing. Okay. Then we have the descriptive research. We already talked about it. The descriptive research is when we are aiming to identify the characteristics, the frequencies, the correlations, all that comes in the descriptive. Okay, and it is useful when not much is known yet. So if you don't know much about the topic, then is the time when you can go for the descriptive research, because there are a lot of things that have to be explored more. So you can go for a descriptive one. For example, see, these are the questions that they have given for a descriptive research. Some examples, like how has the Amsterdam housing market changed over the past 20 years? So let's say we want to research on this. So then we will go for a descriptive research. Do customers of company X prefer product X or product Y? So we are trying to find it out. So this again is a descriptive one. Or we are trying to find out the behavior, or the pattern, the behavioral pattern, the genetic information about some animal maybe. Or I'm trying to find out the most popular online news resource. Now these are some of the questions that I'm trying to find out, and maybe there is not much done on this. So I will try to explore more, and it will become a descriptive research. Okay, now these are surveys, observations, and case studies. So see, again and again, this case study is coming here, which actually talks about the qualitative and descriptive method of research. Okay, experimental design, we talked about it when we are talking more of procedures and hypotheses, maybe some experiments. So we go for it. Like, for example, you define your question, your variables. So now that we know the question, we will form the variables. Okay, these are the factors on which it will be there. And then I will try to find out an hypothesis for that. Okay, I will try to find out the experimental results, right, the observations, and then I can actually test it on a group of people, right? So this is how you do it. You define your research question. For example, see, they have given you the example: phone use and sleep. So there are two terms that you have. One is the phone use, and how is it dependent on the sleep. So how is sleep and phone use connected? So that's the example. So you want to know how phone use before bedtime affects sleep patterns. So this is something that I want to observe. Now there could be some variables. So there are two variables here: phone use and the sleep time, right? And the second example is says temperature and soil respiration. So how is temperature affecting the soil, the quality of soil? So again, we have two variables: temperature and soil, right? Now, what do you do? So for once you have understood the question, now you will go ahead and find out the variables in it. So you will have to find two types of variables. One would be an independent variable, and the other would be the dependent variable. And there could be some control variable as well, which will be dependent on only based upon some exception. Okay. Now, can you tell out of phone and sleep, which one is independent and which one is dependent? Think and tell me. Out of the phone, so we are trying to find out the the answer to this question, that how is sleep being affected by the phone usage. So which one is independent factor here? So if I am saying that phone usage, the sleep pattern would decide, sorry, the phone usage, the number of hours that you are using the phone will decide your sleep pattern. Yeah. So in that case, which one is dependent? The sleep, right? So the number of hours you will spend for sleeping would actually depend upon the number of hours you have spent on your phone. So that's why phone is the independent variable, and your sleep hours becomes the dependent variable. Okay. So that's why it says, so now you have to manipulate the independent variables and dependent. Find out these. So the causes are connected with independent, and the effects are for the dependent. So see, for the phone use and sleep, the independent variable is the minutes of phone that you use before sleep, and the dependent is the hours of sleep per night. Whereas in the temperature case, the temperature is the independent variable, and based upon the temperature, the soil thing is dependent, right? So any other question that I have, I will have to check whether it is a dependent or an independent. Now there could be a confounding or a control variable which will hide the true effect. So that means if there is any exception, that has to be taken care of, right? So it says for the phone use, the natural variation could also be a thing. So that is the confounding, something which is hidden. So we cannot just say that if you are using a lot of phone, your sleep pattern changes. There could be some chronic diseases, maybe. So that could be a confounding variable. That means a hidden variable. For the temperature thing, it could be some already climatic conditions that are there for that particular area. So that could be a control variable. So basically, they are talking about how you can go ahead and find out the variables. So not going inside it. Hypothesis, I've already told you how to develop it. There are exceptions or the assumptions that we are making. So this one is the one that we did, right? The low cost airlines and everything. And based upon that, we find out that, okay, if it is following the hypothesis or it is rejecting the hypothesis. Okay. Talking about the sampling thing, just you should know the techniques that are used. So like the probability, the cross section, more of a mathematical thing, not going into detail. Again, the part of quantitative research. Okay. If in case you are going for it, then you can go for a sampling method, right? Uh, then there is an argumentative research. So based upon some argument that I have. So again, I have to find out the facts, and based upon it, I have to find a conclusion for it, right? So these are the types of researches that you can do based upon the kind of variables that you have, based on the kind of research that you are doing. All that can be done. Now, once you are done with all those things, the last factor that we have is getting the paper published, right? So how do you go ahead and do that? Okay. Now, when you want to publish your paper, now we are talking about something about the research papers that we have. So there is a scientific quality management. So there would be a quality team that will be analyzing your paper. There could be some journal publications. There could be some conference. So your paper could go for conference, could go for journals, right? So these are the places where we send our research papers. Okay. Now see, this is a plan. This is the overall plan that you see for the writing the paper for the publications. For publication means for writing for a conference or a journal. So how it happens? First, there is a planning stage. That means you identify the question, what you need to write a paper on. Then you set a framework, the structure that we have discussed, right? You write the first draft. You check it against all the checklists that was provided by the journal, the publication. So, for example, you are preparing a paper for IEEE. So that's a kind of a publication. So you will have to check all the rules that are available there, all the style guides and all. And based upon it, you have to make corrections in your first draft. Then you have a presentable second draft. You will circulate it to the co-authors. So because when a paper is made, there are some co-authors also. So there are 2, 3 people who together work on the paper. So they together as a team will check for all the corrections, and we'll make a third draft. We can get it circulated to the review team or to the peers, and then we will have an excellent fourth draft. So they are going ahead for the 3 cycle of review. Okay, first, second, third, and finally the fourth draft. And then we polish all the presentations, revisit the checklist, and finally we submit it. So you can see there is an entire cycle before going ahead and submitting your paper, right? So you will have to follow all these steps before going ahead and doing that. Okay. Now, this is how we do it. As an author, you submit the paper, and then as an editor, the corrections are made. If everything is okay, then the reviewer is assigned to it. The review happens. They give some suggestions. Now, as an author, you can decide whether you want to go for those corrections or not. If you accept those corrections, you will make the corrections. If you not, then you reject them. You revise all that. You resubmit the paper. Check the revisions. If no review required, then basically we can go back. I mean, we can go back to decide, and we'll again notify the author that there is no correction required, and you can submit the final version, right? And then we'll go ahead and submit the camera ready manuscript. This is a technical term that is used in the journals and paper submission. We say it camera ready manuscript, which means that now it is ready to be submitted to get published, right? And finally, it is submitted to the publisher. So this is the entire flowchart that you see. And there are 3 entities involved. See, the author, the editor, right, and the reviewers. These 3 people are involved here, right? So it could be that at times you will be at the place of author and the editor, right? So editor means when some corrections has to be made. So there are certain people who are seeing it around the grammar part, around the copy editing part. So all that has to be checked. And reviewer would be the final people, the panel of people, the experts who are sitting there, right? So this is how your paper gets published. Now, this says it is a 7 step of publishing. So, if you are going for a journal publication, there are certain steps that you need to follow. So you should not rush for your submission, right? So, whenever you are writing an article or you are writing a white paper, you should take good time to, you should spend good time to analyze the entire. Otherwise, it might get rejected, right? You need to select the proper publication where you want your paper to be published, right? You will have to read the aims, the scopes, the guidelines of that publication where you are trying to submit the paper, right? So that there are less number of review cycles, right? Because if you know everything beforehand, you will make less changes, right? Then you have to have a good impression. So, first of all, what happens when you submit the paper? You do not submit the entire paper. You just submit the title and the abstract. So that is why, remember, I told you that you should have all the highlighted points in the abstract. That is the reason, because the first review that is done is only for the title and the abstract. They just check the mapping of title with the abstract. That is it, the overall purpose of the this paper is matching with the title. The keywords that are they justified in the abstract or not? Okay, so all that things are checked. Okay, then we have an editing team. So finally, when you submit the abstract, there is an editing team who will check. You will have a cover letter to your manuscript. So you will have to ask the reviewer to check the paper, and finally, if it is selected, then they will ask you to submit the camera ready manuscript. That means the final one. So you will have to have proper steps to follow. So see, it's written, submit a cover letter with the manuscript. So cover letter is very, very important. Suppose you are submitting, the cover letter means the body of the email that you are sending. So it should have all the details, the highlighted points. And then finally, you have to address the reviewer comments. So whatever reviewer comments came in the first draft, make sure that you make those changes. Otherwise, again, there is a good chance of getting it rejected, right? So this is how we do it. Um, the first year, it's so this is about the research thing. So if you are going for a research program, how it happens? It's a research and course intensive, then all that. So not going into detail of this.